A 12-year-old girl accepted the surrender of 11,000 Nazi soldiers. The German colonel handed her his pistol, and then he vanished from history like he never existed. May 8th, 1945. The war in Europe is over. But in a small pocket of southwestern France, near the Spanish border, 11,000 German soldiers are still armed, still organized, and still refusing to surrender. They're cut off from Berlin. Please like and subscribe so we keep bringing you World War II stories like this. They have no orders, no supply lines, no hope. But they also have enough ammunition and defensive positions to turn this region into a bloodbath if the French try to force them out. The local French resistance has them surrounded, but they don't have the firepower to finish this without massive casualties. It's a stalemate, and everyone knows it. Except for one German officer, a colonel whose name history never recorded, who makes a decision so strange, so inexplicable, that no one who witnessed it could fully believe what they were seeing. He walks out of his command post, alone, unarmed, and he asks to surrender, not to the French military, not to Allied command, but to a 12-year-old French girl standing by the roadside. And if you think you know where this story is going, trust me, you don't. Because what happens next defies every expectation about war, honor, and what happens to men who make choices like this. So make sure you subscribe, because we're about to dig into one of the strangest, most haunting stories from the final days of World War II, and the mystery of what happened to the man who gave up an army to a child. Let me take you back to early May 1945. Germany has surrendered. Hitler is dead. Berlin is occupied. The Nazi regime has collapsed. But wars don't end everywhere at once. And in the mountainous region near the French-Spanish border, around the towns of Fos and Pamiers, there's a German garrison that didn't get the memo. Or maybe they got it and just didn't care. We're talking about 11,000 soldiers, Wehrmacht regulars, SS units, Gestapo officers. They've been stationed here since 1943, occupying southern France, suppressing resistance activity, maintaining control over strategic routes to Spain. And now, in May 1945, they're stuck. The war is over, but no one has come to disarm them. No Allied forces have reached this corner of France. The local resistance fighters, brave, determined, but poorly equipped, have them surrounded, but they don't have the strength to force a surrender. And so the Germans wait, and the French wait, and the tension builds. The German garrison is commanded by a colonel. His name was never properly documented, which becomes important later, who understands the reality of the situation. His men are not getting reinforcements. They're not retreating to Germany. The Reich they served no longer exists. Surrendering is the only rational choice. But here's the problem. Surrendering to the French resistance is politically and personally complicated. These resistance fighters have spent years being hunted, tortured and killed by the Gestapo and SS units under this colonel's command. The hatred is deep, personal, and if the Germans surrender directly to the resistance, there's no guarantee that the transition will be peaceful. Revenge killings are a real possibility. Summary executions. Chaos. And the colonel knows this. He needs a surrender that's clean, official, witnessed, something that protects his men from retribution while also acknowledging that the war is over and continuing to fight is pointless. But how do you arrange that when there's no formal Allied command presence in the region? When the only people with guns pointed at you are the same people whose families you've been occupying for 2 years? And then the colonel sees her, a 12-year-old French girl named Magdalene Roch, standing by the side of a dirt road near the German command post. She's not armed. She's not in uniform. She's just a local kid, thin, hungry-looking, wearing a faded dress that's too big for her. She's curious, maybe a little scared, but she hasn't run away, and that catches the colonel's attention. Because in that moment, he realizes something. If he surrenders to this child, publicly, ceremonially, in front of witnesses, it's a surrender that no one can dispute, but it's also a surrender that strips away the political hatred. A child can't execute prisoners. A child can't be accused of revenge. A child is neutral ground. It's insane. It's unprecedented. And the colonel decides to do it anyway. He walks out of his headquarters, alone, carrying his sidearm. Magdalene watches him approach. She has no idea what's happening. The German officer stops in front of her, unbuckles his pistol belt, and hands it to her. Then, in broken French, he says something to the effect of, "I surrender my forces to you. The war is over. We will lay down our arms." Magdalene, 12 years old, holding a German officer's pistol, doesn't know what to say. She looks around for an adult, someone to explain what's happening. But the colonel has already turned and walked back to his men. And within hours, the entire garrison begins the process of disarmament. 11,000 German soldiers laying down their weapons because their commanding officer surrendered to a child. The French resistance fighters show up expecting a fight. What they find instead is a German garrison in the process of peaceful surrender, organized and orderly, because their colonel has decided the war is over and continuing is pointless. The resistance accepts the surrender. The weapons are collected. The German soldiers are processed as prisoners of war. And through it all, the story spreads. The Nazis surrendered to a 12-year-old girl. It sounds like propaganda, like a fairy tale. But dozens of witnesses saw it happen. Magdalene Rock held that pistol. The colonel gave it to her, and 11,000 men laid down their arms because of it. But here's where the story gets strange. The colonel, the man who made this decision, disappears. Not metaphorically, literally. After the surrender, he's processed as a POW, just like his men. But there's no record of what happens to him after that. His name isn't in the official documents. His fate isn't tracked. In the chaos of post-war Europe, with millions of displaced persons and prisoners moving through Allied processing systems, one German colonel simply vanishes from history. No trial, no repatriation record, no death certificate. Nothing. It's as if the man who surrendered 11,000 soldiers to a child decided that was his final act, and then erased himself from existence. And Magdalene Rock, for her part, kept the pistol for years. It became a family heirloom, a bizarre artifact from the war's strangest surrender. She would tell the story occasionally, usually when pressed, but she never understood why the colonel chose her. "I was nobody," she'd say, in interviews decades later. "Just a girl standing by the road. But he saw me and he decided that was how the war would end for him. I think he wanted it to be simple, clean, not about politics or revenge, just over." The pistol itself, a German officer's sidearm handed to a 12-year-old French girl in May 1945, eventually ended up in a local museum where it remains today. A relic of a moment that defies every normal narrative about how wars end. The deeper significance of this story isn't just the strangeness of a child accepting a military surrender. It's what it reveals about the final days of the war, when individual officers had to make choices that their training and ideology hadn't prepared them for. This colonel could have tried to fight his way out. He had 11,000 men and enough ammunition to make the French resistance pay dearly for trying to disarm him. He could have retreated into the mountains and prolonged the conflict for weeks. He could have negotiated a formal surrender with Allied command and made sure his name went into the official records as someone who did things by the book. But instead, he chose the most surreal option imaginable. He gave his pistol to a child and walked away from history. Why? We'll never know for certain, because the man himself left no explanation. But the people who witnessed it, French resistance fighters, German soldiers, local civilians, all came to similar conclusions. The colonel wanted a surrender that couldn't be turned into propaganda by either side. If he surrendered to the resistance, it became a story about French victory over German occupation. If he surrendered to formal Allied authorities, it became a bureaucratic footnote in official records. But surrendering to a 12-year-old girl? That was a story that belonged to no one. It was too strange to be useful, too human to be political. It was just what it was. A man deciding that the war was over and that the simplest, cleanest way to end it was to give his weapon to a child and tell his soldiers to go home. The German soldiers who laid down their arms that day had mixed reactions. Some were relieved. The war was over. They'd survived, and they could finally stop fighting. And others were confused or even angry that their commanding officer had made such a bizarre choice. But none of them resumed fighting. The surrender held, and within days, the entire garrison had been peacefully disarmed and transferred to POW camps, where they waited for repatriation to a Germany that no longer existed in the form they'd known. For most of them, the war ended not with a dramatic battle or a heroic last stand, but with the surreal image of their colonel handing his pistol to a French child and walking away. In the decades since, historians have tried to identify the colonel, to find records of what happened to him, to understand why he made the choice he did. But the paper trail is nearly non-existent. The official French records mention the surrender, but don't name the German commander. And the German military archives from that period are incomplete, destroyed in the war's final chaos or lost in the confusion of occupation. And the Allied processing records for POWs from that region are spotty at best. Somewhere in that documentation gap, the colonel disappeared. Some researchers believe he died in a POW camp and was buried in an unmarked grave. Others think he might have been repatriated to Germany under a different name and lived out his life in anonymity. A few even speculate that he might have escaped during the chaotic post-war period and started over somewhere else entirely. But the truth is, we don't know. And maybe that's fitting. Because the man who decided to end his war by surrendering to a child also decided, whether intentionally or by circumstance, to erase himself from the historical record. He became a ghost story, a legend without a name. The officer who gave up 11,000 men to a 12-year-old girl and then walked into obscurity, leaving behind nothing but questions and one very strange pistol in a French museum. Magdalene Roch died in 2017 at the age of 84. She spent most of her life in the same region where she'd accepted that surrender, raised a family, worked as a schoolteacher. The pistol story followed her. Journalists would track her down every few years, especially around anniversaries of the war's end, and ask her to tell it again. She was always gracious, but clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "I didn't do anything," she'd insist. "I was just there. He's the one who made the choice, and then he disappeared. He wanted everyone to forget he existed." When asked if she ever tried to find out what happened to the colonel, she said yes, once, in the 1960s. She'd contacted military archives, written letters, asked anyone who might know. But she found nothing. "It's like he was never real," she said. "Except I still have his pistol, so I know he was real. But that's all I have. Proof that he existed, and no idea what happened to him." The story of the 12-year-old girl and the nameless Nazi colonel is one of those historical moments that feels too strange to be true, but the evidence confirms it happened. Multiple witnesses, physical artifacts, documented surrender of 11,000 men in early May 1945 near Foix. And at the center of it all is a decision that no military manual could have predicted. A German officer choosing to end his war by handing his weapon to a child and then vanishing into history as if the act itself required him to disappear. It's a story about the end of wars, about choices made in impossible circumstances, and about how sometimes the most human moments are the ones that make the least sense by any rational standard. The colonel who surrendered to Magdalene Roch didn't become famous, didn't get his name in the history books, didn't leave behind any explanation for why he did what he did. He just made a choice, executed it, and then erased himself from the story. And maybe that was the point. Maybe he understood that some endings don't need explanations. They just need to be over. And for 11,000 German soldiers in southwestern France, and for one 12-year-old French girl who never asked to be part of history, the war ended on a dirt road with a pistol changing hands and a man walking away into silence.